I still haven't got around to watching them. I've asked. I knew you were going to ask this question, so I've asked a couple of other people, and apparently Homecoming's very good. And there's a series called Hollywood, which is worth catching. And maybe if lockdown goes on for another year or so, maybe I'll get around to watching those.
It's totally okay to not be watching stuff though as well. It's
it kind of is and isn't.
How about you, Martin?
Well, I was working from January on the 4th series of something called Unforgotten, which I did series 3, and I think it's a really, really good whodunit. It's one of those whodunits that there are a number of people who could plausibly have committed this murder, and you don't get thrown a kind of curveball at the end with something that you couldn't possibly have worked out. So it's very good, and I think we might get onto it later. It's shot in a very sort of simple but quite interesting way. But we stopped in March like everybody else. We did about 8.5 weeks of 13. So in theory, there's 5 or so weeks to go. It'll probably stretch to something longer with all the COVID stuff. When that happens, I don't know. The production have been in touch and said, good luck, everybody. We're not going to do it yet, but we'll let you know. So, as to what I've been watching, all sorts of stuff. I've finished off Ozark on Netflix, which I think is brilliant. The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon Prime. I don't know if anybody's seen that. An American Jewish stand-up comic woman in the 50s and 60s. And it's hilarious. And it's beautifully put together, beautifully shot. And just now, which might come back to our handheld conversation, I've been watching something on Netflix called Bloodline, which is not amazing, but I can't put it down really at the moment. I'm in the middle of the 2nd series somewhere, so that's what I've been looking at. But it's all shot handheld, which we might talk about later.
Yeah, I think we should definitely get into that. Tom, if I could come to you, I'm just sort of going to bring on the conversation really of handheld, and I wonder if you could sort of, in terms of your opinion, what this aspect of operating the camera sort of brings to the table, and where is it appropriate? What is it useful for? Do you think?
So is that?
Sorry, it's for Tom.
Tom.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you can have sort of handheld in an action sense, which is a very sort of obvious sort of use of handheld. But I think, a lot of the time we see handheld being used for kind of emotional scenes and emotional films. And I think that's fantastic, because as a handheld operator, you can really get inside the story. You are a human being on 2 legs, as is the actor, and you're kind of really present, with them, and you can, and the audience is really present with you. So it's a very sort of naturally instinctive and energetic sort of way of presenting the image, and something it's a fascinating one really, because you should sort of think that handheld is easy to do, but actually I think it takes a lot of time to do it properly.
Well, what would you say to that, Martin? Do you agree with that, or is there?
It's, I mean, as Tom says, there's the obvious, fights and scenes with a bit of tension and with a bit of emotion where there's a bit of tension in the scene. Maybe if it's not a fight, then following somebody around a house where there's somebody there, or that kind of the thing. What it really does is it brings the audience sort of more into being part of the scene, rather than simply observing, and takes the audience with the action. So I quite like doing it. I do think there's too much of it around, which we might get onto. I do like doing it because it makes you, as an operator, much more involved, really. You're following the actors, following a weapon that gets thrown down and gets picked up, chase somebody, come back, find somebody else, that kind of, and you almost become sort of one of the performers in the scene, and becoming part of the action. So it's quite fun to do. The other thing I like about it is that it's easy to find the right shot. So often when you're on a dolly or a dolly and slide or whatever, and the actors don't go where you thought they were going to be, the shot's not quite right. You sometimes can help it with a slider, but you've got lamps in shot. And you can make the shot work if it's not quite how it's choreographed. And in a fight, you are making the shot all the time. So you can sort of, you adjust all the time to get the shot right. Whereas you don't get those frustrations of, well, if only that actor had been there and I'd been here, then it would have been okay. And now let's move on because the time's flying by. So I quite like that aspect of it. But I think sometimes, if you want me to go on about that, I will. But I think it is overused.
Well, we could pick up on that maybe in the next section. But I just wanted to check with you, John. Do you agree with those kind of thoughts in terms of, the instinctive approach to operating handheld, if you like?
Yeah, I do. I agree with what the guys have said. It puts the audience right in there. I mean, you're normally on the lens that works for handheld, and that is a lens that also feels like the audience is there with the actors. There's an immediacy to it. You can react as an operator. I think, there's a discussion that to be had about, could you shoot anything handheld? Could you take a period drama and shoot it in its entirety handheld? I know there are some DOPs who really like handheld. There are some directors who might think you should only ever use handheld when you're doing a POV through the bushes. I mean, that sort of idea to me is, it's long gone. But there are some people who, for them, handheld is a distraction. They like a nice steady frame, and they see. I mean, and everyone's got a different point of view on it. Personally, I like handheld. I don't often see handheld work that distracts me from the performance. I think if you're in a situation, in a scene where you really want to get that emotion from an actor, maybe there's no dialogue, maybe it's one actor, maybe it's all about the reactions. And, and you're working on a certain lens, maybe that's the time to actually come out of handheld. And, I think you're driven by the content of the scene. But generally, I think it's a very simple approach, but one that's really effective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very honest sort of approach, really, isn't it, chaps? It's like,
absolutely,
you're right there with them, and so is the audience.
Is there a sort of a time where, I don't know if you've experienced this, where maybe Martin, you could speak, have an opinion on this one, but is there a time when maybe time is against you, and people said, "I'll just throw it on the shoulder for this, that, and the other reason"? Do you think that is, does that happen to you sometimes, or?
It does happen. It hasn't happened recently because the recent work I've been doing, it's far more controlled, and the director's far more organised than to let that happen. But I have had it happen many times where you're rehearsing a scene at 6 o'clock to be shot by 7, and suddenly it's all got to be handheld for no reason really other than you've got to get through it in the time. And, to be honest, it is quicker, and you can understand the director saying, he's just got to get through the day. So that sort of does creep in, and maybe that's okay. I mean, a lot of the scenes, as John says, you can shoot a scene handheld, and it's not to its detriment necessarily. But there is a lot of the DP I've been working with most recently was operating a job last year himself, and it was a quite well-known sort of comedy drama thing, 6 episodes, and he shot the whole thing, not out of his choice, the director's choice, shot the whole thing handheld. And it's people having conversations around breakfast tables, and it's not really a scene which requires any added tension from the camera. And he said, "Look, I don't think this should be handheld." And she said, "Well, I think he said it was we just got to get through the schedule, so we're just going to shoot it all handheld." And maybe it doesn't matter. I've got this, as I said to you earlier, I think it's overused. It's a discussion to be had. Maybe it's not overused. Maybe it's me just looking at stuff I see on the telly and saying, I don't understand why it's handheld, so much of it. But maybe that's okay. And the thing I was talking about, Bloodline, might be an example of that. But yeah, you do often get that must hurry, so let's do it handheld thing. That's true.
John?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Martin said there about tension in the camera. I mean, that was certainly the case. Let's create some tension by somehow going handheld. But I'm not sure that's necessarily the case anymore. I mean, you see a lot of commercials. There's a very contemporary way of shooting, I think, for something that's so, you know, there's an idea anyone can pick up a camera and do it. It's so simple, the approach. It's actually quite a contemporary way of doing it. You see commercials for everyday products, and it just feels very current. It feels very, I think it's kind of the audience are I think the audience are very accepting of it. They don't necessarily think that handheld is associated with some kind of extra tension in the scene anymore. Maybe there was a time for that. I'm not so sure that is how it is.
Or that the crew are running out of time. You know, I think as long as it's fitting to the story or the project, it's okay. It's just not okay if it's, you know, out of context with that, or it's the wrong piece of kit for that shot. You know, like someone running through a forest, or, you know, and suddenly you've got, you know, this incredibly, you know, shaky, unusable image, and that's wrong. But otherwise, I think, you know, it's anything goes, really, as long as it fits.
So we say as long as it fits. You mean as long as it's appropriate for the scene? Or I think we're sort of, what we're kind of discussing is whether it matters that a scene that traditionally or some years back wouldn't have been shot handheld is now shot handheld, or sometimes the whole thing is shot handheld, including all the scenes where people just having dinner.
Handheld movie or TV show, then, you know, obviously no one's it's going to fit in, isn't it? But, and also if that scene has an edge to it, then obviously, yeah, that'll fit in. But like you say, people sitting around the table having breakfast very calmly, if the whole show's like that, then maybe that's just the style. But, you know, it's very subjective, isn't it, really, as to what's right and wrong. I mean, I like handheld. I like handheld operating, you know, used in the right way. But, you know, I do think some shows, anything of too much is too much. And you can't do a whole show just with handheld. I don't think it's possible. Yeah, the right tool for the right job. But I, you know, I'm kind of a fan of handheld anyway. So.
I was just thinking about types of handheld. I mean, if we're going to go into handheld itself and the practicalities, which we will do, is there, John, like, if you're on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most energetic handheld, 1 being the least energetic, can you sort of, do you find yourself almost dialing in a certain amount of energy into the camera when you're operating handheld?
I think it's inherently got that feel to it, and so I find myself always trying to keep it as steady as I can. And sometimes I reflect on that, and I think actually that it may not have been the right thing to do. You know, maybe it's lacking that exactly what you get with, you know, maybe there should, I'm trying, but it often feels wrong to try to put that into me.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, it's kind of, you know, someone says, "I'll try and make it a bit more energetic." You know, sure, okay, I'll endeavour to do that, but it's I think it's there anyway. It comes with the camera being on the shoulder. I
agree with you, John. Yeah, I think inherently it's there, and then I think personally I have to kind of rein it in a bit, because, you know, I think you're responsible as an operator for, you know, controlling this lens, and it's very easy with handheld to flash it around way too much. So I'm constantly checking myself, really, and telling myself to calm down. That's something I've sort of worked on with it over the years.
I think my instinct has always been to try and, all right, it's handheld, but try and not make it look handheld. You know, I've tried to sort of hold it as steady as possible when no one's moving, move when someone moves, and then hold it steady again, and try not to kind of to give it anything deliberate other than what I can't help doing, merely by the fact that it's on my shoulder. And it seems like the right way to go about it to me.
If you're approaching the task of handheld, and you are with that ethos of trying to make it steadier, or just as steady as it can be, is there any particular approach you take to it, John, in terms of the camera setup, calibrating the camera in a way that is, you know, I'm just thinking in terms of getting it comfortable and getting it set up right?
I think that like to get it as compact as possible and as close to me as possible. So whether it's on the shoulder or just under the eye line, I like to strip it back as much as I can. And I've kind of I've done away with the bars now as well, you know, the handlebars. I've sort of, you know, I just grab hold of the matte box bars. And on the last job I did for Christmas, we you know, the matte box had a really nice, it's not there for handheld work, but it was really easy to grab onto the actual matte box. Of course, what happens is you're always pulling the matte box off, or the bars are pulling, so the motor's slipping on the focus unit, and the focus puller is getting really cross for you. But I tend to strip it right back. I try not to even have a shoulder pad, really. Just get rid of it and just kind of wedge it in and make it and try and get my elbows in, you know, so the weight isn't out there with the bars and everything else. I just try to bring it all in and just try to make it, sounds a bit wanky, but, you know, as much as part of me as possible, really.
Yeah, I think it's all, you do the best you can, don't you? You know, you get the eyepiece in the right place, the ACs line up with you beforehand, and you know. But I think if you're on a handheld job, day in, day out, it's going to hurt. So you just got to kind of lump it, really, to a certain extent. But I think, you know, if you have, for me, it's 3 points of contact on the camera. It's just 2 hands wherever, you know, on bars or, you know, on handlebars, and my head in the eyepiece. You know, I found that is a way of me moving, you know, the camera, you know, as much as my hands, really, you know. So that's kind of what you rely on in the end, just having those 3 points of contact. But yeah, you do the best you can, but yeah, it's.
I think I would agree with what the guys say. It's a question of, like John says, getting it as compact as possible. Maybe using sometimes don't use bars. I don't really know what I do and don't do actually, but yeah, possibly using the bars and get the eyepiece to an absolutely comfortable position, so I don't have to kind of reach for it in any way. So it's just exactly in the right place, and that's not only is that kind of comfortable and easy to do, but it means that when you've gone through a maneuver, walk through a doorway or whatever, and find a static frame again, because you're in that comfortable position, it naturally sits where you want it to be. It's level, which is another thing that's important, obviously, with handheld. You've often seen things framed, seen things like that on the television quite a bit. So, you know, and if you've got it set up right, when you stop your move, it'll settle in a nice frame if you're comfortable with it. So I think I agree with the guys there.
Yeah. I had a question about camera weight, but actually I've got a question here from Gareth Evans. Hi, Gareth, and it actually kind of fits in with what I was going to ask. Is that he says, with some of the latest cameras on the market coming in a small cube-shaped form, red cameras, Ariel, F Mini, have you found handheld operating style change? Have you found your handheld operating change? Sometimes holding the camera in front of you with both hands and a monitor on top. And I mean, I've been in this situation where you've got the Mini and you're trying your best to sort of nestle it in nicely, and then that cotton reel's in the way and you have to extend out to get the balance right. You know, smaller cameras are all very well, but you know, do you find that that's also a little bit challenging to get them comfortable as well? Let's ask John that.
Oh yeah, you froze on the last bit of that question. Would you say that again?
Sorry, yeah, I was just wondering if the smaller cameras that are sort of slowly getting released and coming out are actually the answer, and are they actually more difficult to get them balanced and sort of correct on your shoulder?
I don't know. I mean, when you say small, would you include them in that, or do you think smaller than that?
Well, I was thinking, because, you know, obviously you guys have been around a while, with all respect, is that the cameras were a lot heavier back in the day, so cameras are getting smaller and smaller. So, you know, and sometimes I've had that experience where they are quite front heavy, and then you have to extend out the back just to get it balanced up. So is a lighter camera, you know, actually the answer, or is it actually sometimes more challenging?
Not necessarily. No, I don't think so. I think you need some weight to it, and I think you need some balance to it, and I think it shouldn't all obviously be front heavy. With a lighter camera, you're still gonna have a lens on the front, which then makes it front heavy. Although I said that on the last job I tended to not use the shoulder pad. I'm still resting the base of the camera on my shoulder. I just didn't like having that shoulder pad there. So I think the shoulder needs to, however you do it, the shoulder needs to take the weight. Once it's off the shoulder, I think it it doesn't feel quite so good for me. And if it's light and floating around in your hands, again, I'm not sure it's for me, that's not as good.
I like
Go on.
I like to put us on the you know, the Alexa cameras, the LFs and the 65 mils and just normal Alexas. I like to put a steady cam plate on the bottom, and then you can kind of adjust where you have it. Otherwise, you're into that arch, which is where they predict, you know, it should be. And actually, it's not in the right place sometimes with different lenses and whatever you've got on the camera. So I like to give myself flexibility like that. I think light is definitely better. You know, yeah, absolutely for handheld, but you don't always get that. And you just, you know, whatever you've got, you know, after a while it hurts. But I'd always go for lighter, yeah.
I think light is good. It's really more a question of balance, really, as long as you can get it balanced, because you've got a light little camera with a lens on the front, and you've got no weight behind. You have to start, you know, I've been putting padding underneath it to shove it back as far as possible, get the eyepiece as far forward as possible, and try and get as much of the weight backwards. Because however light the camera is, if it's all the weight's out the front, it's not the fact of the weight, it's just it's not as controllerable. So
the DXL has a nice thing where the battery slides down at the back, and actually that really works. It actually makes, if you tried it, it makes a fantastic difference. It really sits, you know, on your sheet. You can really.
I haven't tried that. I will.
It's an amazing thing, actually. Yeah, it's like, wow, it's like having the old, you know, what they say about the Arton, and it was sat on your shoulder like a cat.
Yeah.
And you know, it's the same sort of feeling. It's great. So that's a nice thing. Well, I haven't used it in anger.
Thanks for that question there, Gareth. We've got another technical inquiry from Mark Wiggins. Hi, Mark. He's a regular viewer. What do the guys think of the Easy Rig? Also, has anyone encountered the Ergo Rig? If so, what do they think of it? I'll just ask John that first, but then I know that Tom's got some thoughts on the Ergo Rig. So,
the Ergo Rig, no, I don't. I've not encountered that. The Easy Rig, I've tried. I tried it years ago and I didn't really get on with it. And then I tried it again on just recently. Sorry, it says my internet connection is unstable. Are you getting me all right?
Oh, we're hearing you. Yeah, I think it's
yeah, okay. I just find it. I just can't get on with it, and I don't know if it's because you know, some of the guys who find that it works for them, they've got a way of balancing it and tuning it and making it work. I think there are times when, for me, it works if you're on a particularly, you know, if you're on like a 135 or something and you're quite static and you're just trying to control the camera in those very slow pans or something like that and have a little bit of control, that's quite good. Or if you're low, particularly low and working off a monitor, then it can work. Generally, especially for walking shots, I find that it just is out of sync with me. And so I've tried to get, I know one, maybe people get them so they can get them on the job, and it all gets paid for in a few weeks, and that's a good reason to get one. But in terms of the operating, I've never got on with them.
No. Tom, how about you?
I think they're great for certain scenarios. So if you've got a shot that's, you know, hip height or very low, and that's where you're going to be for the shot, and that you want to move around in that area, then I think the Easy Rig's great. But I wouldn't use one all the time. No way. I think it really inhibits your freedom, and takes away sort of the natural feel of it, of the shot, of the handheld, the organic nature of it a little bit. Sometimes you get everything stuck up and it clinks around, and you're not able to get where you want without really turning your body, and you get all caught up. So I don't like it. But if it's if I know I'm going to be down low, then yeah, I like to have one on a job for sure. But I'll use it a handful of times. So the Ergo Rig is a thing that I actually bought before I started a job last year, a handheld job with 65 Alexa, and I've got it here actually. It's like a sort of Steadicam vest, half of a Steadicam vest, and just sits on your shoulder here, and just it spreads the weight onto your hips, of the camera, and it's good. it retains the organic feel, I think, of the handheld shot. But it has its drawbacks. So, you don't want to use it if you're really going to be, want a lot of flexibility. And, it's really for long lens shots when you're kind of, I'd say, for me, static, and long takes. So it helps a lot. And for a long lens, it can keep it really stable. So it's great, but, you need to know when to use it because it can, inhibit you. And that's no good, in the middle of the shot.
Is it me? No, I agree with all of that. It has its uses. When it first came out, I sort of thought, well, this is going to be a useful bit of kit, takes the weight off you and so on. But I very soon worked out that it kind of does tell the camera where to go occasionally, unless you can make it let the camera sit exactly where you want it. It's good for those low shots, as we've been talking about. But I got myself into almost got myself into trouble on a job last year. I was in Prague, and we had a week of sort of tournaments, sword fighting, horses chasing around. And of course, the director, who was 30, said to me, he looked at me, and he for the week before, he said to me, "These fight scenes next week, I'm going to shoot them all handheld." And I said, "Yeah, okay." "Is that going to be okay?" Looking at my grey hair and all that. I said, "I'm not as old as I look." Actually, I am. But so I came into the week thinking, this guy's a bit nervous about what I'm going to do for a week of handheld with this. It was the DXL Panavision camera, and we had the E-series anamorphic lenses on it, and I was worried about the anamorphic frame wobbling too much. He's a bit tense about it. How's it going to? So I put the Easy Rig on, and just did the first couple of shots and then got rid of it, because although it took the weight nicely and all that, what it meant was that as soon as I had to start chasing these young guys sword fighting as they're moving around, the Easy Rig took the weight of the camera, and instead of me controlling it, it was hanging on a bit of cord, and that anamorphic frame was wobbling like that.
Yeah.
And, we had a quick discussion around the monitor, and I said, I'll just lose the Easy Rig and we won't do that anymore. But I got myself in that situation because I could see this director was twitchy about this old geezer kind of.
I think it goes back to what John and you were saying, Martin, about having the camera, attached to you, really with you. And that removes it, I think. So, yeah.
So I'm not a massive fan of it. I just think it has its place, rarely.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying, and I agree totally. And I was thinking, it makes me feel like when I've got it on, yes, it is taking the weight, but it's like the grip's reaching over you, and he's taking the weight, and then you're not moving. Suddenly you're moving, and the camera isn't quite moving. It doesn't respond in the way you're expecting it to respond.
It does unpredictable things, and you're not in control of it somehow.
Having said that, I worked with a DP a couple of years ago who, had an Easy Rig, and he insisted on having the Serene, attachment to it, and he was amazing with it. Amazing. He'd really, really got it down, and it suited him, and he did some incredible things with it. So I think it's, it can be great for some people.
Yeah.
Mm.
I worked with a DP who was doing, it was a comedy for Sky, and it was all handheld, and it all took place in this one pub basically. And he had started off with the Easy Rig with a Serene arm, which goes really high up. And what he noticed was he was walking around the pub just knocking over glasses and just hitting stuff. So, after a couple of days that was gone, and he was just walking around with normally on the shoulder. So got a couple more questions here. So thanks for all these that are coming in so far. Paul Hill says, is there a camera you've dreaded putting on your shoulder? Tom, I know you've done some stuff with some slightly bigger cameras. The Lexa65, I believe. Yeah,
I've done 3 films with the 62 handheld films with the 65. So, it's it depends what lens you have on. It's a big lump, and then if you have a Panavision anamorphic 70 series lens on, which we did on Rogue One, that was very heavy, I have to say. It was pretty crazy. I mean, it's sort of in the realms of, I guess, an IMAX style weight. That was hardcore. But but you just did it. You just do it. We had on the film that's coming out in July on Netflix called The Old Guard, which Barry Ackroyd was the DP, so a lot of handheld on that. That was with DNA lenses, and they're very light. And naturally, it was heavy. And we stripped the cameras right down. Simon Tyndall, the A-camera operator, said, "We're going to take everything off the cameras, and we're going to have backpacks." And that's what we did, and it made it a lot better. I have to say, there was literally 2 motors on there and a C-tape, and that was it. So that helps a lot, you get around it, and you just do it, don't you? Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that one. Unless anyone's got a cool story about a really a heavy camera that they dreaded.
But you go back to the old 35 BL, and the loader had run out of 400 foot, rolls, and would I mind putting 1,000 foot roll, and that's heavy. But
having a 435 with a Panavision lens on, with a 400 foot mount, that's heavy. That's really heavy. People forget about that. It's probably heavier than the Alexa with the DNA lens we used. It's probably heavier. So, it's all heavy.
We should have called it It's Heavy.
Yeah.
Go, John. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's not. I mean, it's Tom's worked and probably Martin and worked with bigger cameras than I have. But it's not so much about the weight. As long as the weight of the camera's going through your legs, I think it's okay. I don't think it's about the weight of the camera. I think it's the awkward situations you find yourself in supporting the camera. When you're crouched and your back is arched and you're looking up. Those kind of situations you're trying to hold the shot. I think it's more about the situation than the actual camera, for me.
I think you're right. You can be in a lot of pain with an Alexa Mini as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
So a lot of it, would you say, is technique and getting yourself into a situation where you're comfortable? I wondered if does that play quite a large part in this, Martin? Is getting yourself in an operating position that's very comfortable to actually do the shot?
Yeah, it is. Well, getting comfortable, and what it's mainly, if you've got something which is quite set, your actor's going to go there and you're going to walk over here and do that, and it's not kind of free form like a fight would be, then, and it also helps the focus pulling. And if I find myself a couple of foot marks, so I remember where I start, so that when I make that turn, I know exactly where I'm going and where I come back to for the next take, and you get yourself in the right position. The shot works. If it's something like that that's kind of repeatable, which I learned watching one of the very old school operators. He had feet marks and started the shot in exactly the same position every time, and stood, turned, crouched, and he really sort of nailed it all down. And it was to get the shot right, and it was also to be comfortable as well. So it's just that. The other thing I do is it's not really, well, it is about comfort because it makes the shot right, is in order to keep the camera level. And sometimes when you're walking around with it, your eye tells you, because you're looking at with your eye tells you that things look normal, but actually the frame has crept over like that and it doesn't look right. And I've got into the habit of putting for handheld work, the largest center cross that the camera will generate if it's a digital camera. So you've got a good upright bang in the middle of the frame, and you can always just check that with the uprights on buildings, uprights on windows, door frames, and so on. As you're going through the shot, just check yourself all the time. But it's
a good idea, Martin. I'm going to do that in future.
Well, I've often felt you could generate a straight vertical line right up through the middle of the frame, which would give you a constant reference of what upright is as you're looking at it, rather than having to sort of look at.
I have that with my Steadicam monitor. Actually, I have a huge cross. It takes the whole frame. And actually, it's the upright one that I use. You check it all the time.
Yeah.
So it's good to have it in the eyepiece. Yeah.
In terms of sort of getting ready for these kind of setups, particularly if it's going to be a handheld heavy job or shoot, John, is there anything that you'd sort of suggest or recommend in terms of physical training, or do you get prepared for it in that way, or Yeah, what's his technique?
Well, I guess, the answer is yes, you should get prepared for it. Of course, you should stretch, you should keep fit. Actually, it's really good having some time off work now, because one of the things I'm trying to do is really increase my fitness. It probably wouldn't be right for me to kind of give advice to 20, 30 and 40-year-old camera operators about how to keep fit and get ready for a shot. I mean, I'm sure they're all much fitter than I am. It's common sense, really.
And Tom, how about you? Is there any particular? Are you doing like a workout regime? Are you doing the yoga? Because I know you operate Steadicam as well. Is that
slept a little bit recently, to be honest, but yeah, getting ready for a show. I have a trainer I go and see. In the months before a show. If I have the time, and he gets me into shape a little bit, and I do yoga when I can. I used to do quite a lot of it. Did some today, which was good. It's fantastic for stretching, for recovery, after Steadicam or handheld, that's just amazing. And yoga will help you with your strength and your balance, and just your recovery as well. So that's a huge one. But I really think, that's, in preparation, I would do that, and try and do that. In regards to getting better at handheld, I think the only way to do it is to do more handheld. It's a bit of a catch-22, really,
I just try to keep generally fit. I've had back issues for years, and I think that's partly to do with stooping and bending and being in the camera department and standing up for hours on end at work. But I just go to Pilates and I swim when I can, and I just try and keep fit. I don't do any particular training regime. I just try and more or less keep in shape for somebody of this age.
Into Pilates a bit more. I think those Pilates machines, I forget the name of them now, but they're just amazing. They work. There's little muscles, you never even think about in your body. It's just incredible. So yeah, I think I'm going to get into that next.
Let's have a look at the questions. Thanks very much for all these questions that are coming in. Keep them coming. Let's have a look. We had one from Peter Cavacciuti. Hi, Peter. He says, what's your preference, holding the matte box or holding the handles? I think, John, you touched on this earlier. You can get yourself into a comfortable position to hold on to the matte box. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, that would be mine. I feel, I don't know, somehow the camera responds better for me when I'm holding the matte box rather than but I never quite seem to get the bars in the right place for me, handlebars, and I use them because they're always there, but actually I just got rid of them one day and I find it easier without.
Because there's the bars that come spread out quite wide, aren't there? And then you can get ones that are almost like small moose bars that are closer. So I don't know, is there a preference with that, Tom, for you?
I drive my focus pullers bananas because I always start out with one system by the end of the shoot and one's a completely different system. But I know what you mean about holding the matte box. It's great. It feels really immediate. I've got bars, and I tend to use the bars. They're Romford Baker bars, and with my own grips on. I tend to use those most of the time. And sometimes when I can't, I need the space. So there's not enough space to move in the set or whatever. Then I go just onto the bars themselves, or I've got a kind of like an old school Arton walnut whip, which I kind of use as well to get in there. So yeah, I use a variety of things, but I guess I use the standard bars just most of the time, really.
I think, like Tom, I end up driving them crazy because they come and say, what do you want? They get the bar kit out and it's enormous. And you think, well, I don't really want all that. Reduce it. I always end up, I know, reducing it, usually, thinking about it now, just to one bar on the right-hand side, attack, just literally one little, and then with my left hand, I'm probably hanging onto the matte box. So the answer to the question is a bit of both. So I think I just got the matte box bar and maybe the front of the matte box in my left hand, which is not doing much of the work, and my right hand is doing all the kind of holding it. I think that's what really happens, but I always have to evolve to it as the job goes. what's the best way of doing this? I'd sort of end up somewhere there mainly.
I wonder if we could maybe, should we get into some examples of work? John, I wonder if I could just talk to you a little bit about The Last Kingdom. Firstly, congratulations, great show that. I've watched a couple of series of those. I haven't quite got around to your series yet, apologies, but you did series 4, is that correct?
Yeah, I did 6 of the 10 episodes of series 4, yeah.
So this show is, would you say, predominantly handheld as a style, and then beyond that, you will, sort of take on different styles depending on the scenes?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's lends itself to handheld. The content of the show absolutely lends itself to that. There's a lot of fight scenes and the rest of it, and so it's, as opposed to a lot of shows which are conventionally covered and handheld where they feel like it suits, this is probably the opposite. It's, its default position is handheld, and then if there's a different feel to the scene, then we'll find a different way of shooting it.
I think the handheld style works really well, and it was established, I think, quite early on, wasn't it, in the previous series?
From day one, probably. I think probably from series 1, it's always been like that. And it's a very quick way to shoot. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm quite impatient. I quite like shooting quickly. And there's a picture there of me on a rostrum, and I've been on rostrum before with horses on pole dart, for instance, with the cat on the head and the legs, and the horses move, and suddenly someone's got to jump on the rostrum and move the grip's got to jump on and move the leg 6 inches to the left. By the time we've done that, the horses have moved again. You can have sliders on there. Suddenly it builds up, and this is a very efficient way of shooting.
I've got some other shots here, but not necessarily handheld. There's quite a lot of work on the. Is this a boroscope?
Yeah, Tim Palmer, lovely Tim, got that in on specific days. Yeah, it's a real beast. That.
It's quite an interesting contraption you've got there. This sort of a mini jib.
Yeah. Look at it. It's it took some setting up that. It's one of those, with all those kind of shots, you wonder if there's time in the schedule on shows to really kind of make. You always worry that you're going to end up walking away at the end of the day thinking, did we get what we? It's because they're always quite a faff. But when they work, it's those little moments that you see in the show, and you think, actually, I'm glad we did that.
Here's a good tip for any operators who want to get a shot along the water there. Let's use the old classic. Is that a polyboard there, John?
It is, yeah. I was feeling that made me feel a bit queasy being in there, to be honest.
Oh, really?
It wasn't very nice at all.
And lying down on the job, John?
Wherever I can. It's all about being comfortable, Ed.
Exactly. Well, that's great stuff. Thanks for all that stuff. Tom, if I could just jump on to you there. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with Rogue One, because it's one of the films in the Star Wars series that is actually quite handheld heavy, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, Greg Fraser, the DP, is an advocate of handheld and a bit of a maestro. That was always, the style he was going for, and it's kind of his style, to a certain extent. So I knew Greg from Zero Dark 30, and I just started. I was a focus puller on that, and I just started operating in sort of 2014. At the end of 2014, he gave me a call, and I'd been in touch with Greg, and I'd sent him my show reels and my website that I'd done, my very early ones. They're pretty crap, to be honest, but I knew him, and I got asked to go and test at Pinewood Studios for Rogue One with my Steadicam. I just didn't think I'd have a cat's chance, really, of getting it. But in the end, we did a series of tests. One was sort of, stamina with the 65 Lexa on the Steadicam, and another one was kind of instinct, an instinct test. And I guess I passed. So so I didn't hear anything for months, and then finally got a phone call in May the next year, asking me to be part of it. And yeah, I think it's, you know, Greg. I know Greg, and I think he likes to work with people that he you know, he can communicate with, and you know, kind of do what he says, I guess. So I was the man for the job, and I was on the C camera and the Steadicam, and it was a huge learning experience for me. It was my first film, my first, you know, film operating, really, first big film operating. So with the handheld and that, I just learned so much. You know, I was learning all the time. I was learning off Greg. I was learning off Gareth Edwards, the director who did a lot of the operating. And I was kind of really trying to emulate what they were doing, really, to a certain extent, because I was, you know, I was pretty inexperienced, and I was, you know, just trying to get by, not be fired. But it was an amazing experience. You know, I was pinching myself regularly, you know. Being a guy who grew up, a boy who grew up, you know, with Star Wars, not old enough to have seen the first film, you know, in the cinema, but we had all the toys, and that was our thing. So it was, I was, you know, really blown away by it. You know, it was an amazing experience. Yeah, I learned a huge amount. And I think you do on every project, but that was, you know, that was, for me, that was just, the learning curve was right up there.
Is any of these, you've given some nice shots here, but are these any of these from Rogue One?
Yeah, there's one actually in a helicopter. So that's just on the Secret Guard. That's from Rogue One. That's with my friend and then focus puller Henry Langree, and we're doing some aerial shots at Bovington, which was the set for the tropical world of Scarif. And that's the rig that the grip set me up with, just to hang out that helicopter and just get some aerial shots, which was the first time I'd shot out of a helicopter. And then suddenly, you know, you're like, Tom, you're in a helicopter, and it's like, off you go and you do it, you know. And I was very naive, really, but we got the shots.
I've done a tiny bit of helicopter work, and what I found interesting, and I was very inexperienced with, I was with the DP. The DP actually was very good at communicating with the pilot, so that was something that I had no experience in, and I realised it was actually quite useful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we were all on the same radio channel, so you know, it was a great conversation, and you know, the pilot just put me in the right place, really. He was Mark Wolf was the pilot, very experienced guy. So he was fun. He used to be a pilot in Vietnam. So that was on the Old Guard, and there's Barry Ackroyd there. That was shooting in Morocco there.
Well, we can touch on that after this, I believe. But I just want to get some thoughts from you, Martin. Is there a particular job that you sort of would like to talk about that's overly handheld? I know you mentioned Unforgotten, although that's not necessarily handheld, is it?
Well, in a way, it's a good example of something which, because John mentioned earlier that handheld work is the kind of a contemporary way of shooting, and we had a discussion earlier about whether it's appropriate to do or not, and I'm still not sure. I do take on board what John says about contemporary work can be handheld, and that's maybe fine. But on Unforgotten, there's a very particular way it's shot, and when I was interviewed for it originally, having looked at the first two series that Gavin Finney and his crew did, he wasn't involved in series 3 that I did. That's a bit of Unforgotten with my mate Alex Howe. What's required for this? It's real people in a real situation. You're not asked with the camera to add anything in terms of the drama. We're not doing fancy focus pulls or strange angles or kind of framing things kind of in a way. We're not doing that sort of thing. It's very kind of conventional. We're always trying to get the camera in the right place, and the framing's really precise so that the audience knows exactly what's going on, who they're listening to. And it's basically, listen to this person. Is this person guilty or not? So it's very kind of straightforward but quite precise framing, and we try to sort of not set a frame and let the actors work the frame rather than do too much chasing around. So it's a good example of something for which handheld would probably be a mistake, because as soon as you try to add something or give it a bit of edge, take it away from what you've been doing, then you'd be taking the audience in the wrong direction.
So it's rather an honest sort of capture of the, as you say, a real capture of the characters. So
yeah, so there's not too much camera movement. There are tracks here and there, and we do a lot of very, very slow pushing in on the slider, which is a nightmare for the focus puller because there isn't much stop, and Alex done an amazing job. But so that as scenes intercut, the shots are very gradually tighter without actually seeing a move. So you're pushing in on this. There's a lot of that going on, but it's something which would be wrong to be shot handheld. Yeah, but it's a very enjoyable job to work on. We finish early. The director knows what it's doing.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Yes, John.
Can I just touch on what Martin said there about the framing? I just wanted to ask a question there. Were you ever asked to put the actors right in the middle of the frame? The reason I'm asking this is because I never had been asked that until I did a job just before Christmas with a young, talented director who loved the idea of the singles, the actor being right in the middle of frame. And it struck me as being unusual. It doesn't now because I've done it. And I just wonder if that was when you said about that approach to Unforgotten, whether you were found yourself putting people very in the middle of the frame.
No, in fact, very much not that.
Okay.
Andy, the director, wants it very sort of conventional, kind of golden mean, looking at the focus on the right place in the frame, so the eye goes to where it should be. And he wants those nice kind of classic, what you'd know as cinema and good television.
Yeah, absolutely.
No kind of. If I put them in the middle, I'd probably get fired, I should think. But and I've never been asked to do that actually, unless it's a shot that's supposed to be looking like it's a newsreader or something, in which case that's all right. But I've never been asked to do that otherwise.
Maybe it's the next big thing, Martin.
Central framing, yeah.
I got asked last job I did last year was weird because we had these different DPs coming in to do different blocks, and one wanted lots of headroom, the other one wanted very little headroom and everything centre, like literally bang in. If you were slightly off, you'd be on the talkback system, so just go a little bit right. And so actually after doing the block with him, then I went back to the other guy and I was central framing everything because it was kind of ground into me. But yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
I have found some success in communicating power in a central frame. I don't know if you've had that, where you've got someone maybe at a desk who's right in the middle.
Yeah.
Something quite powerful about a central position on the composition, maybe.
Yes, now you say that there were occasional shots where it's like that, something very symmetrical, man at a desk. Yeah, that would be one example, but not in regular kind of close-up work, no.
All right, so let's grab a few more questions. Jamie Harcourt says, have you got a good physiotherapist? I think that's tongue-in-cheek, that one. Good one. I don't think I've ever been on a job where there has been a physio on board as part of the. I know they did on 1917 because I talked to Charlie and Peter about that one, but I think that was understood as that was going to be the order of the day, really.
You're lucky on the old guard because the whole thing was handheld. You knew that from the start, and the production. There was a few massages provided by the production on the way through for Simon, Barry and I. And And that was,
it makes sense actually, really, doesn't it?
amazing. Yeah, it really kept us going, you know. It was fantastic. It does make sense. You're right. It does. And they were good
When
things.
it's in the budget.
Yeah, yeah.
We've got a question from Tim Gee, sorry. Breathing and steadiness. Would be good to hear your thoughts on a long-ish lens doing handheld. What do you think, once you notice your own breathing, then the game is up? Do you guys have any techniques for breathing?
Yes.
That take so you can't detect your chest going up and down with the yoga rig?
It helps a lot. That helps a huge amount. I like a cine saddle I use as well sometimes, you know, well, quite a lot of the time. If I'm not using that, I'll have a cine saddle. One of those mini cine saddles are great, you know, and they really help. I can just put my elbow into it. I find that's good. But yeah, you do, you know, sometimes you do notice it and you kind of just move it away from yourself a little bit, you know, just to combat it.
I have occasionally found that if you're on a long lens for a long period of time and you're not walking around anywhere, you can sort of take the camera away from the fists and kind of work more with your fingertips.
Yeah.
And kind of hold it, especially if it's balanced nicely. You don't have to hold the weight up. You can just kind of have it more on your fingertips. And then you've got more flex here so that your breathing is not so easily transferred into what the camera's doing. I think I have never thought about it before, but I think it does help in that way. Just sort of something you do out of because it seems to help without really thinking about it too much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. It's a good question, actually. I know, Tim. Thanks for the question, Tim. And I've definitely been in that situation on a long take, where, especially if it's cradled in here, and I don't even realize, but I'm actually holding my breath for the whole take, and then there comes a point where or trying to breathe, you know, the very shallow way, and it's not working. So you have to have a different approach. One tip I had from a camera operator years ago was that if you're trying to keep it very steady, particularly on a long lens, he was saying maybe don't try and keep it so steady, you know. And I find that helps, actually, rather than to keep it like rock steady and you get that natural vibration or that shape. You know, if you just use your own movement to just kind of give it a little something, it just helps to take that shake out.
I'd just like to add, I was told by a DOP about something called the victorious breath, which is where you breathe more through your belly rather than your chest. I haven't managed to achieve that very well, to be honest, but I think with practice you might be able to get something out of that, because then your shoulders don't move up and down. But yeah, as I say, it was a good tip, but I personally haven't been able to nail that one. What have we got? Another question from Gareth. Do you prefer to have your focus puller next to you with the monitor on the camera, or prefer the focus puller to be remote? I'm going to add on to that. Do you have a technique of working with your focus puller in terms of setting marks and everything when you're running through the rehearsals? Do you like to say, this is where I'm going to go, I'm going to go here, set some marks, or do you like to try to keep it a bit more organic? Tom?
So, you know, when I was a focus puller, I was always occasionally stitched up by cameramen who would tell me they were going to be in a certain place at a certain time and then weren't. So I don't try and lead a focus puller, you know, don't try and give him false hope, you know, really, and lead him down a path that's never going to happen. But I guess, you know, I try and give him, you know, what I would like, would have liked in those scenarios, you know, just a few distances to work with. And, you know, I say, look, I don't really know, I'm going to be kind of around this area, but don't hold me to it. I'm, you know, I wouldn't, I might have a start mark, but, you know, I wouldn't give them false hope. That's the thing. You know, I think as a focus puller with handheld, you know, they've got to be in it with you and really, you know, feeling it as much as you're feeling it. So I kind of tell them to expect the worst in a way. But I do try and help them, obviously, you know, as much as I would like to be helped, you know, when I was doing it.
How about you, John? What's your process with working with your focus puller?
Well, I like them to be close. I know they like to work off a monitor now, but even if they are doing that, I like them, to be within earshot. I think, the lines of communication need to be open and they need to be clear because things can change pretty quickly. I'm probably a focus puller's nightmare because I just, when I'm handheld, I'm moving around all over the place and I often just forget to tell. So and I know I am. So I'm always apologising to them for that. And I do understand it's difficult for them. It really is when you're handheld. It's almost impossible. You've got moving actors and a moving camera. It couldn't be more difficult, really. But the nearer they can be to me, at least we can constantly talk about it. I'm not a great fan of them being so far away.
No, that's a bad thing, I think, in this day and age. I think remote's great, unless you're in a real hurry and the shot doesn't really need it. But yeah, having them close is really important because sometimes you can actually be stuck on your own in the set, and that's just really frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I do miss that kind of close communication where in the old days when it was film and so on, you'd be looking through the camera, you've got a focus puller here, and I would then have a clearer view of what focus is doing more than the focus puller would. That's not the same these days, but you'd be saying go back a bit, or come, whatever, just chatting quietly. Now they're a bit more remote, and I kind of miss them being right there. But having said all that, John, to answer your question, I do try to get organised. If it's a sort of a set move on a set, put marks down where I'm going to start, kind of put a mark down where I should end up, having walked backwards onto this position to put a mark there. Probably never going to get exactly there, but in my mind, it gives the focus puller an idea of how far I've gone beyond it or how far I've not quite reached it or whatever it is. It gives him a chance. But very often I've just said, look, I've got this mark here, and they've come back and said, don't worry about it. It's all jazz, or it'll be fine. Just do it, And I've got to say, I'm quite astonished at the ability of focus pullers these days with that chip they're working on. And, the thing I've been doing recently, we're always working at 1 something or maybe 2 something if they're lucky. And it's always sharp, and I don't get it. And I know it's much harder than it was when I was a focus puller, because at least we had time to do rehearsals and measure stuff and so on. So I'm amazed by them. So although it's not a nice thing to have the focus puller remote and with his monitor and so on, that's the system they now work. They've got their little distance rangefinder on the, little binocular thing on the camera, and it all seems to fall into place. And so who am I to complain? I do try to be as helpful as possible. They sometimes say they don't need it.
His or her monitor, incidentally.
Her monitor, yeah.
Yeah, we got that's great. That's actually really fantastic answers on that one. So thanks for that other question. Gareth has confirmed that John is a nightmare, by the way, or was a nightmare. So that was, I think he's having a laugh with you. Actually, John, it'd be good to chat about, because if we want to talk about handheld shots, it's I know that you've done this very excellent one shot, which was an entire episode of Casualty in one shot, all handheld. I wonder if you could just take us through how that sort of came to be, how that started out, and sort of what was the approach in getting into that.
Well, it was an interesting project. I was brought onto it by the DOP, Sam Butcher, and I think it was an episode to mark that. I think they were changing producers, and they wanted to kind of mark the final episode before they moved on to new producers, maybe different style, different episodes. And they came up with this idea of doing an episode in one shot. In the end, it wasn't actually all in one shot because they had a pre-title sequence, which was done on a movie actually, which was on location. The way it was written, the first 3 or 4 minutes were on location, and then it led into the hospital. Actually, it went into an ambulance and then a hospital. So they really couldn't do it as one from the very beginning because there was a stunt sequence and the windows are blown out and fire in the first few minutes, and obviously you can keep revisiting that. So they they separated that out. But then once we got into the ambulance after the titles, it did really run as one continuous shot all the way to the end. The producers were keen to do it on Steadicam, but the first few minutes of it were in an ambulance, and we talked long and hard about it, and we decided it was going to be really impossible to shoot in the back of an ambulance with Steadicam, a moving vehicle. And trying to be mobile in there, you know, and trying to get because this is all about you know, we're panning from actor to actor. And so, you know, there was a lot of discussion, but I think we always knew probably that it would end up being a handheld shot. And I you know, we had a week to shoot it. We had a week of rehearsals and then a week shooting. We actually had 4 days. I think we did it about 8 times. We were always going to use up all that time because you know, you're never going to not use the last day if you've got one. You're just going to carry on doing it. Oh,
I believe we've lost
John gone. He's had enough.
John there. That's a shame. Never mind. It was getting good. It was getting tasty.
Good, yeah.
Yeah. So perhaps we'll try in the meantime. I'm sure Chris behind the scenes will try to get John to come back in. Oh, someone's reconnecting already. This could be John. There he is. Let's just wait and see. We're dealing with modern internet connections here. Just need to unmute yourself, John, and then we're good to go. Yeah, it should be one of the tabs on your laptop or iPad. Talk amongst yourselves, everyone. There he is.
any good?
Yes, John. Sorry, there you are.
Did you cut me off, Ed? It's very naughty of you. Was I talking to you?
We're going on a bit, John. Sorry.
I wasn't. I was aware of that.
No.
Getting good. It was just getting good.
It was just getting good. Yeah. I was about to share some pictures actually, so I'll share those whilst you carry on because it was we're in this gone into the hospital basically.
I think you know, it worked. It worked as well as anyone expected it to work. I think, you know, everyone, the crew and the cast worked really hard, and the rest paid off. And you know, and we got one I think that was accepted as being pretty good and very usable on like day 2, but the one that actually was transmitted was the very last one we did when it all kind of came together. So it was an enjoyable experience.
I mean, it's honestly, it's quite an achievement when you watch it. I remember watching it. They screened it, and just, you know, I can definitely say in terms of choreography, in terms of stability, the shot never really slacked off. There was always lots of energy to it, John. And then I suppose a lot of that, how much of that is you working with the actors, working with all the supporting actors and working with the director to get it right?
Well, John Sen, you know, had that rehearsal time with the actors before he got any of us into it. So he had a broad plan. But like all these things, it develops once you get a camera in there. You know, there are tweaks that are made. Definitely, there were a few changes that were made because, you know, maybe I was in too tight a spot, and I'd asked John, you know, is there any way we can kind of move this section over here, just to give me a bit more space and a bit more time to get around. You know, we're constantly trying to lead actors into the next space, so space was at a premium. It felt very natural though. You know, John's blocking kind of did feel very natural. There weren't bits of it that felt clunky for me, you know, and the actors all, you know, considering there weren't any marks, the actors all hit their marks. They were incredible.
And I suppose if something goes wrong, you know, the show must go on with that, given such a long shot.
Yeah, I think so. And I can't, you know, I honestly can't remember every take we did. I think maybe there were one or two where John just called it out from the gallery and said, you know, but I don't think the actors ever fluffed their lines or anything like that. I honestly can't remember why. I think, you know, there were some that just didn't, you know, some of the cues weren't quite right. You know, it's a bit like doing a live show, isn't it? Some of the cues weren't quite right. You just know that it's not a great one. I think we'd always, because we had the time to do 2 a day, I think we pretty much always went to the end. Yeah, it was, you know, I bought a new pair of trainers specifically for that job. It was, you know, it's really, I think it's really important that you say about making yourself comfortable. I think I think when you're doing handheld, actually, one piece of advice I give to people if they haven't done handheld, I'd say, you know, wear a good pair of trainers, make yourself comfortable. It's really important. I personally find it really much harder when you're forced to wear boots and you're outside on cobbles and it's wet and it's dark and it's cold. You know, it's really, I find it much more difficult than when I've got a comfortable pair of trainers on.
And it's worth mentioning that you do that's something that didn't happen in the end. You were saying it was an idea for the end.
Yeah, I think maybe they thought that was a little cliche doing that at the end. You know, it was kind of it was a initial response to how shall we end this? You know, to kind of take the viewer away from the hospital. I think John made the right decision to keep the camera in the hospital. So the last few seconds went out with the camera being in the theatre. So this, you know, all the nurses and the doctors and the staff were back in the heart of the hospital.
And there was a moment where you do a handoff to another operator, Scott Milton, in this moment, isn't it?
Yeah, there he is. Yeah. John was very keen on, you know, taking the camera upstairs at one point and then drop. There's like a gallery area of the set, and he was keen to kind of drop the camera back down to ground level. It's quite complicated. You know, it's a big achievement that because it meant the camera operator needs to be on a harness. There he is. And initially, I suppose that was going to be me doing that. But we separated that out. Scott was there as a kind of backup for me, but we ended up giving Scott a section really just to do that drop. But obviously, he took the camera 2 or 3 minutes before they had a horrible walking back upstairs, a section to do, which led him up the stairs. And then he kind of got dropped off there. So he kind of got the short straw, although all the publicity photos were obviously of Scott. So maybe it wasn't for him.
Looking like Superman. Yeah. I wonder if it's worth just shouting out your focus puller and clapper loader. Some of them had to dress in outfits in case they got seen.
Yeah, they did. They're a great team. I mean, there's Ben and Sophie. Sophie wheeled Ben around all day there in a wheelchair. And he was just amazing. Honestly, I couldn't believe how good he was. Really, just a top team, you know, to have on board. Forwards, really, I'd say.
Right, and okay, let's end that there. Shall we have a look and see if there's any more questiones? This is just a message from Mary Kite. Hi, Mary. Great session. Love to see you all. Lots of love. It's always nice to hear.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
All the time.
Hello, Mary.
There's another message from Jamie Harker. I sometimes used to cut a tennis ball on the right hand bar handle and use my forearm as a prop with my elbow resting on the front of my hip. Good for the parts of the shot where you want to keep it still. Never used that technique, but sounds interesting.
Something similar, yeah.
Yeah. Anyone? It's in that sort of sense. Is there any tricks of the trade that Martin that you can think of that you like to use when you're doing handheld? What do you do in a situation, for example, when you have to do a very low shot? You know, I've found I had to do handheld shots of kids sometimes, and they're obviously very short. What's your solution with that?
Yeah, well, more recently, I've occasionally used an easy rig for that. But what I did find is very useful, and I sort of discovered it by accident because I was doing a job running down a corridor following a dog or something, and it's only, you know, a small dog. And so I put I think it was an Alexa. If you imagine a magic arm, I clamped a magic arm onto the back of the handle, up at a right angle and forward at a right angle. So now I've got two sides of a square, and joined the front clamp of the magic arm down to the front of the handle on the camera. So I've created a kind of a a little bridge on top of the camera, and use that as a handle, which lowers the camera down by probably that much. And then you can hold it at arm's length, and it's another foot lower than your arm can reach. And you can still tilt up and down because you've got control of it that way, and pan left and right. And I found that that's quite good for, you know, if you're walking along, you don't have to start stooping down like that. You can just, so that's a technique that I've used quite successfully a few times. I would think there was some kids around a campfire, something like that, and they're all sitting down on the ground at night, and we needed to kind of move around and be at their head level. And I just got the camera down. You can get the camera down to about, you know, a foot off the ground quite happily, just like that. So that's a little piece of a gizmo that I kind of invented. And then the monitor obviously up above, which worked quite well. That's about it. I don't have any other clever techniques, I'm afraid. I don't think, anyway.
You probably just are doing them and you don't know you're doing them.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, I'll think about it.
Yeah. Tom, I was just going to ask you, I've got a question about what's the best sort of advice or tips that you've sort of gleaned off of people that you've worked with. And I know that you mentioned earlier you worked with Barry Ackroyd on a sort of an up and coming production. I'm sure there's something that you must have learned from him.
So much. I mean, Barry was just incredible. I think the best thing, you know, he brought immediately to that production was just the freedom to go for it. You know, that was what Barry brought on day one. And I think that's what you need to do on a handheld shoot. You know, you need to not be restrained in a certain way. You've got to just give it your best. And there was no pressure to you know, or control there. It was just like, just go for it, guys. You know, if you see it, you know, do it. And it's not always going to be right, but we're going to get a lot of good results like that. And we did. So that was, you know, that was Barry, and, you know, and how brilliant he was. I think I probably responded well to that in that situation and that time in my career, having been an operator, you know, constantly for sort of 5-6 years and done a considerable amount of handheld. I probably responded well to that because I'd done a lot of handheld in the past, you know, so I was able just to go for it. But yeah, on my first film, which I talked about earlier, Rogue One, I was, you know, really trying hard to do the handheld, you know, and with Barry's thing was don't try, just go for it. And I think that was just incredible, and that's where the magic comes from, really. I think with handhelds. It's like you should have anyone can just pick, like we said earlier, anyone should be able to pick a camera up and do handheld. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. And I think it comes with practice, ultimately.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, it's good to hear that he's like that, you know, and giving you a chance to express yourself rather than being prescriptive.
But I mean, brilliant, and you know, and it was so great to work with him because, you know, you'd see a shot, he'd do it. There were 3 cameras, and we'd all be doing our shots. And his thing was really, obviously coming from a documentary background, was get yourself in the right position. And we were always on long lenses with Barry because, you know, he loves them, and you know, I grew to love them too. And get yourself in the right position. Tom, what shot do you want to do? Simon, what shot do you want to do? So we'd choose, and then he'd just sort of end up in the 3rd position, you know, the C camera position. And then you look back at Barry's shot, it was always brilliant, you know, even though he was in the profile position or whatever, you go, oh damn, it's really good. So you know, and sometimes you look back at his shot and think that's, you know, just looks like a little frame out of the Hurt Locker or something. So he's just the maestro.
Mm. Fantastic. Well, I think we've pretty much covered quite a lot there. So I wonder if we might bring it to a close, unless anyone has anything to add to that. No, it's good. Science all around. Fantastic. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Fantastic. Great to hear your insights into handheld. And yeah, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Nice guys. Thanks so much.
Cheers. See you. Bye.
How do we do this?